All right. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first in a series of 6 volunteer manager webinars that I'll be giving over the next month. My name is Heather Burke, and I'm the National Partnership and Volunteer Program Manager. And today's topic is going to be just a general overview of the volunteer program. As we go through the series of 6, we'll go into a lot more detail kind of from start to finish, the major things you need to know as a volunteer manager. For those of you that have taken this training in the past, it's going to be a refresher. I basically do this series every year because we have such a turnover of volunteer managers, at least at the project level, not so much at the district. But there will be some new things peppered in. But if you have participated in these in the past, you'll recognize a lot of the same information. But I just like to get it out there for folks that maybe haven't seen it before, and just a refresher is always good. Just a reminder to put your phones on mute or your Teams on mute. I will monitor the chat as we go, but there'll be plenty of time at the end of each of these sessions for questions if you want to come off mute as well. Most of these will not go for the full hour that I've allocated. And I am recording these, so there'll be the audio, and then we'll also have the slides that will be available. I'll post those on the NRM Gateway training pages, and then they'll also be in this chat history for this meeting. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Just to begin, I think everybody knows how important volunteers are to our NRM program. Just in pure numbers, last year, we had an increase, which is pretty amazing given that our staffing went down so much. So we really helped make up some of that need by volunteers. We had almost 43,000 volunteers contributing almost 2 million hours of work. And that's an estimated value of 66.4 million. And when you consider that our recreation budget and our stewardship budget, which are supported by these volunteers, is generally around a total of 450 million a year. 66 million added on top of that is significant. And the great thing about our program is that volunteers can do just about anything. I mean, it's really up to your imagination. If it's something related to recreation or natural resources, well, in fact, the actual legislation for volunteers doesn't even limit it to that, but for the sake of these webinars, we're going to be focusing on the NRM program. But some of the areas that we use volunteers quite a bit for are our park, campground, visitor center hosts. They do a lot of interpretation, education programs. They help us with habitat enhancement, invasive species management, a lot of trail construction maintenance, a lot of shoreline cleanups, litter pickups, but also special skills like GIS or mapping, photography. If you have a need, you can put that out there and see if someone might be interested. You never know who's out there that wants to give back to their community, and they've got a special skill, and they might be able to use that with us. Every year, we take the data that people put into SWIBI, that's our data management system, and we put together a fact sheet. So this was just recently sent out, and it has a summary of not only our volunteer program, but also our partnership program. And I think it's really great just to see all those numbers in one place and share those success stories, not only within the Corps, but with your volunteers, with your partners. People really love seeing what they are a part of, and they love to be recognized. So share this widely. This is something you can print out. You can post it on Facebook. Use these numbers to help tell our story. So why do we need volunteers? Well, I think everyone knows we're not getting enough money to manage our programs and enough staffing, especially with the hiring freeze this last year. So we have to be reaching out. And then also those volunteers are a link to our local community. A lot of times they are our best advocates. Sometimes as a government agency, we don't get the best reputation or we get bad press. And those volunteers can help us build bridges within the community and build trust. And then they bring those unique skills and abilities, whether it's a more elderly person that has a lifetime of experience, or a young kid that has that enthusiasm and that energy and that strength. So our volunteers run the gamut from 5 years old to 90 years old, and all of those can provide a special skill and a service to us. And every position that we fill with volunteers is an opportunity to engage the community and build our constituency. Like I said, they are our best advocates, and they can really help recruit more volunteers. There's only really two limitations on what our volunteers can and can't do. They can do just about anything we do as long as they have the right training and experience. But they cannot enforce Title 36, and they cannot create policy. They can help educate the public on our rules. They can hand out the Title 36 pamphlets, they can point out, but they can't actually enforce. But volunteers really are our eyes and ears in a lot of our parks. I mean, some of our parks are completely managed by volunteers, and so they are there all the time. They can see what's going on, and they can reach out to a ranger, or if you have a law enforcement contract or some kind of partnership with your local law enforcement, they can bring them in for that enforcement. So we don't want our volunteers, putting themselves in harm's way, especially if there's some sort of conflict going on in the campground or in our parks. The thing that allows us to have a volunteer program was a public law 33-569C, and that law has been amended a couple times by various water resource development acts. And basically, it gave the chief of engineers the authority to accept the services of volunteers, but also pay for incidental expenses such as paying for uniforms, transportation, lodging, and subsistence. So that's some food for those volunteers. And then our most recent WRDA 2024 also allows us to pay for recognition items. And that was a big win. I'll talk more about that in another one of these webinars, but for the longest time, we couldn't use appropriated funds to buy recognition items for volunteers, and now we can, which is fantastic. So we have the public law, and then we have regulations that we operate under to implement what the law allows. So this is ER 1130-2-500, Chapter 9 is the volunteer program. And just a week or so ago, we updated that chapter with policy guidance that included that WRDA 24 section about what we can pay for as far as recognition items for volunteers. So be sure to check out that updated policy guidance that is on the NRM Gateway. It was also sent out by email a week or so ago. And then the other policy we follow is how we determine the value of service of our volunteers. And this isn't just a number that we pull out of thin air. We go by with the independent sector's hourly rate. And this is what all the federal land management agencies use. So we have consistency across the Corps, the Park Service, Forest Service, et cetera. And every year that rate is updated during National Volunteer Week, which is like the third week of April. So we're still using FY25 rate until then, but I will always send an email out every year when that's updated. And then I also post that in a couple of locations on the Gateway for your reference. And then in SWIBI, when you do your annual data entry, it's automatically updated in there, so you don't have to remember what that rate is. So as far as our policy, we can accept service from individuals, from members of organized groups. There's no discrimination allowed when it comes to recruiting and bringing in the services of volunteers, but they must be qualified to perform the work and physically able to do the work. There's some jobs that are very physical volunteer jobs, and then there's others that are just require sitting in a chair, sitting behind a desk. So you just need to match your volunteer to the work that you're trying to get done. And then as far as groups that we can accept services from, that can be individuals from the private sector, from other state or local government agencies who donate their services on a short-term basis, even if they're being paid. So sometimes you might have like a REI or a Lowe's or some Burger King, any sort of private sector company that has a program where they want their staff to be involved in their community, and they will pay them to basically come out and volunteer. We're not paying them, but their host agency is, and that's fine. We will take their service, and they're getting paid by their host. We also can have off-duty Corps personnel volunteer. The only caveat on that is you can't be doing work that you would normally get paid for. So if you're a park ranger, you can't volunteer your time to come do trail work or interpretive programs or something like that. But somebody that worked in the district office in engineering could come out and help out as on a trail day or something. We also do accept services from children, and I'll go into more details on how we do that. And then permanent residents or foreign exchange students. So for children, that's under the age of 18, they can volunteer for us, but they have to have their consent of their parent or guardian, and it must be on the OF 301A volunteer service agreement. Even if they're volunteering as part of a group, and that group, like Boy Scouts, has their own forms, we are not legally allowed to accept their consent form. We have to use the OF 301A. And that is not unique to the Corps. This is also standard policy across all the federal agencies. So any volunteer groups that have volunteered with a federal agency should be used to this. I know it's not fun to do extra paperwork, but this is what legally protects the volunteer and protects the Corps. And then legal aliens / permanent resident volunteers, we can accept them if they have these 3 types of visas, a J1, J2, or F1, or a permanent resident card, also known as green cards. I occasionally get emails from foreign volunteers that are interested in coming over and working for us. But if they don't fall under one of those categories, I just have to thank them. And some of the other agencies have a little bit more liberal policies. So sometimes I'll direct them to the Park Service or the Forest Service. But if they have one of these forms of identification, they are good to go. And then volunteer duties, rights, and responsibilities. So volunteers can sell permits. They can collect fees as long as they are properly trained. And they need to sign a statement on their volunteer agreement that they're accepting the risk and liability of handling those funds. They do not require fiscal law training. I've had that question come up before. They can also operate our vehicles, vessels, machinery, as long as they have proper training and license in accordance with our policies. And again, that should be stated on their volunteer service agreement, what they're going to be operating and what they've been trained for. And they are liable for damages if they're found negligent in their operation. Looks like Katrina asked, are they allowed to be on our boats? Yes. So if they are just riding in the boat, that's fine. They're covered. If they're going to be operating the boat, they would need to go through the boat operator trainings. And there is not any training required if they're not operating. Their liability, like if something happened in the boat, if they were injured, they are covered under workers' comp for that. And that's my next slide, actually. So they receive the same benefits and protections as federal employees. The Federal Employees Compensation Act and Tort Claims Act, as long as they're acting within the scope of their responsibilities. And that's not for us to determine. If something happens to a volunteer, we submit all the claim forms, and it goes through the workers' comp office, and the determination is made on what kind of compensation they would get. And then another thing, just to be aware, even though our volunteers aren't typically considered to be part of USACE for Employee Assistance Program or CISM, we can offer those services if we feel like it's needed, like maybe there's been an emergency, something traumatic, distressing. Maybe a volunteer was involved in a drowning, a recovery, or something, really bad happened on the project, we would involve them in the debrief with CISM, just like we would with the rest of our staff. And if we felt like they needed, they could use the services of the EAP, we can refer them to that. So it's not prohibited, even though they're not technically a USACE employee. One of the things I like to cover in our volunteer program, even though these are not under the same authority, we do have a number of other categories of service where we can get free services, essentially like a volunteer, but they're under a different authority. Oh, I see a question. I'm going to answer it before I go through these get into these categories. So, do volunteers have to get defensive driving certification? If so, do they need to go through the background check, get a CAC UPass, or can they get the cert some other way and be reimbursed as an incidental expense? Okay, a couple questions in there. And I've seen different districts have different policies on defensive driving. In some, they don't even require it for the federal employees anymore. So whatever applies to the federal employees applies to the volunteers. In other districts, they are still requiring defensive driving. So if we have to go through a driving training that involves a CAC and that volunteer doesn't have one, what we've done in those instances is we'll have a core employee essentially log in and have like as many volunteers that need to take the training will sit in a room and they will go through the training with the core person, advancing the slides or advancing the training. And then at the end, the core employee, the volunteer coordinator, documents that those volunteers have gone through this training, and just keep that in their records. And so they're not going to have like a certificate associated with a CAC because they don't have a CAC. If they do have what's called a NEATS token, and used to be called a VOLAC, we do have a process to get volunteers networked computer access, then they could do that training on their own. But any volunteers that don't have a CAC that need that training, that can be done by a core employee. How do we do defensive driving now that free trainings is gone? Again, if it's something you have to pay for, that can come out of your project budget. That's just a cost of the volunteer program, just like buying uniforms is a cost of the volunteer program, or reimbursing for local transportation, mileage, that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to these other categories of service. Like I said, we have one authority for our general volunteer program that I've been covering, but these are noteworthy because they also provide free service to us. One is what we call partner-funded personnel services, and this is for long-term volunteers that are paid for by another entity. And the authority for that falls under our Challenge Partnership Agreement. Then another one that we have is the ability to accept inmate labor services. And that is authorized by its own code, 18 USC 4125, and our contributions authority. We can receive services by military, reserve, or federally activated National Guard units. That was authorized by a Water Resource Development Act of 22. We can also get services from state activated Guard units under our contributions authority. And then we can get services under the Army Career Skills Program and Department of War Skill Bridge Program. So I'm going to go into each of these a little bit more in detail just for your awareness. Now, none of these involve the OF 301A form because these are under a different authority than our general overarching volunteer program. But the thing I want you to take away from this is the bottom line is we're getting this work for free. We're not paying for these services. So the first one is the partner funded personnel, and that's under our Challenge Partnership Authority. And it's different than if we just have a one-day event, like I mentioned before, maybe Lowe's sends their employees out for a one-day community service event. This would be if someone wanted to pay a volunteer for a long time, maybe like 6-8 months to operate our visitor center desk. and they're getting paid by their employer. So we have a special set of forms that we fill out for these. And this is, again, this is no cost to us, but this is the paperwork. So there's a challenge partnership agreement. There's a partner funded personnel information sheet that goes through the dates of work, the work schedule, the description of services, and then a recognition statement that the person signs is basically saying they are not a government employee or a federal volunteer under our typical volunteer authorities. They don't get liability, workers' compensation because they're getting that from their employer. They're not getting reimbursed from us. Everything, all their pay and benefits is done by their employer. So that's why it's a little bit different than our standard volunteers. The civilian inmate labor program, this is, again, something at no direct cost to us, and we can get minimum security community custody inmates to do work at our projects. And a lot of this is very physical, manual labor, constructing, repairing roads, doing maintenance, trash pickup, landscaping, planting, environmental protection. Those are some examples of things that have been done before. And the procedures for working with inmates, we have a civilian inmate labor policy, and it's all outlined what you need to do. You have to have an MOA, a memorandum of agreement, and we have templates for those. So there's one for federal facilities and one for state and local facilities. There's a couple little differences as far as who signs, the sheriff or the warden. And then there's different authorities referenced for each of those. But the bottom line is you're getting civilian inmate labor out of that. Some things to keep in mind if you're wanting to use this program, it's only minimum security, so non-violent crimes, and those who are not considered escape risks. There is no direct labor cost expense for the Corps of Engineers. I mean, we can spend some nominal cost on just the oversight, providing equipment, materials. The inmates will not operate Corps vehicles. So that's a little different than our regular volunteers. And we cannot transport those inmates. The corrections facilities must provide inmate transportation to and from the Corps site and around the Corps site. And they also must provide supervision of those inmates. We as Corps employees will not be used to guard, control, discipline, etc. And then it's a rule of thumb that when we bring in inmate labor, we try to limit it to areas that are not currently occupied by the visiting public. That's not always possible, but if you have like a busy swim beach on a summer July day, you wouldn't want to bring inmates in to do litter pickup in that area, but they could maybe go work along the roads, or they could do some trail work or something like that. Some of the frequently asked questions I get on this program is, if you have community service workers who have court-ordered service, but they're not incarcerated, do you have to go through all this paperwork for them? And the answer is no. If they are not incarcerated, they're not in custody, they're treated as a regular volunteer. So in that case, you would sign them up on our standard OF 301A. You might have to fill out some additional paperwork for the court just to verify their work hours, but they are not considered inmates. Now, work release inmates who are incarcerated in the evenings, but released without supervision in the daytime, are considered under this program. We would have to modify the MOA because they would be unsupervised. So in that case, we'd have to elevate the paperwork and get a deviation from our Director of Civil Works from that approved template. But it is possible. It's just a couple extra steps there. And then, can we pay the corrections facility for transportation of inmates? No. The correction facility must handle all the inmate transportation, including costs. And I know that's been a sticking point in some places, where the local institution just couldn't afford or didn't have the vehicles or the time or the staff to be able to come out and do this. But that was talked long and hard with council on this, and that was like, there's no debating this. We are not going to be transporting or paying for transport. All right, switching gears to one of the other authorities is our Troop Training Authority. This came out just a few years ago in WRDA 22, and this allows us to take services from reserve components, so Air Force Reserve, Army Reserve, Marine Corps Reserve, etc. And they can do work on our land that's part training for them, but we get a benefit out of it. For instance, maybe they come out and they construct some trails, or they construct a bird watching platform, or they do some demo of old buildings. They get training, but we get something that benefits the public. Maybe they bring some dozers out and they clear trail, or they clear fire line, or something like that. So this is for a federally activated units. There's a note down here that state activated Guard units, we can get their services under a different authority, but not under this one. The benefit of this, the military gets training, necessary training for their soldiers, and then we get construction on our projects. The interaction between the uniformed service members and the civilians can help those soldiers get skills that will help them in the civilian world when they leave their service. It helps us accomplish our goals, maybe get some unfunded or backlog maintenance items taken care of. And it just gains overall efficiency for our programs. And these are some examples of work that's been done through this troop training exercise. You can see a lot of great stuff: heavy equipment training, design, construction, disaster response, boundary surveys, aerial inspections. We've had dive team inspections of our dams. A lot of these things, we just don't have either the staff or the skills or the background or the equipment, and these units can come in and do that for us. And then what you need to be able to work with these is an Armed Forces Reserve Component Training Agreement, and we do have a template for that. We've got approval levels based on the value of that service, like who actually has to sign that document. And then, of course, anything that they do needs to be within our authorities and types of work that we would normally do. We just would have it done by them instead. And then this is just an example of the guidance that was put out, and then the example agreement that you would use. And then where to find these units, there's, for each branch of the military, there are websites where you can go and look and find if there's one near you that you might reach out to. And we often recommend, if you're going to do this, involve your district commander, because they love, when we involve anything in the military, but a lot of times they'll have relationships with some of those local units too. So they can help with reaching out and starting those conversations. The last one I'm going to talk about is the Department of Defense Skill Bridge program and the Army Skills program. These two programs are for transitioning service members. So in their last 180 days of service before they either retire or leave the active duty military, they can come work in the private, the federal, the public sector, and learn civilian careers. So that's the benefit for them. The benefit for us is that we get highly trained and motivated workforce, and it does not cost us anything. So for DOD, I guess I need to change this to DOW, but Department of War pays all salary and benefits, and they get their compensation, they get their benefits. We have a national MOU in place to set these opportunities up. You basically just need to post your opportunity on the SkillBridge website. Our HR is currently working on getting the implementation guidance out for this. It should be out in the next month or two, so there will be step-by-step instructions to learn more. The other one that's similar is the Army Career Skills Program. Same kind of thing. The Army pays for all salary and benefits. They get a chance to work in civilian careers. It's in their last 180 days, although they can't exceed 120 days in this one. There's no MOU required. And typically, in this case, the service member is reaching out to us to find if we have any opportunities. The goal of both of these programs is ultimately to hire on the person that you've brought in. If, like right now, where we've got the hiring freeze, it would require an exemption, an ETP. But even if you can't offer them a job when their time is up, it still gives them those skills that they can go out and seek other employment. So I always end our slides with your resources, the NRM Gateway, if you haven't been to it, the partnership and volunteer pages, we really keep up. We keep it very current and make updates almost every day to the site. So use this resource, all these templates, all this policy, all the legislation is on here, best practices, examples, you name it, we've got it on the Gateway. So with that, that wraps up today's overview. Just want to mention, like I said, this is one of 6 that I'll be doing in the next month. So the next one will be on Thursday, and I'll be covering volunteer.gov basics. And so I'll cover just an overview of the public volunteer.gov website, the district volunteer coordinators, volunteer.gov Salesforce website, and the most recent team member portal that our project volunteer coordinators can have access to. This will not be super in-depth, step-by-step how to do everything, but I just want people to see what's out there, what tools are available, and then you can dive in more. And then following that, we'll go into these other 4 topics. And then I also like to remind everyone that National Volunteer Week is April 19th through 25th. So be thinking about maybe doing some volunteer events, whether that's service events or recognition events. Great time to recognize those volunteers. So with that, I will open it up for any further questions. I don't see any new ones in the chat, but feel free to type or come off mute. You are welcome.